Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Today's episode is much more graphic than usual. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Last week, I told you about how Laura Ackerson had been dealt a really shitty hand in life. Still, she had the guts to move across country, away from her parents to start over. She was doing pretty good until she fell in love. Grant Hayes was an abusive narcissist. He didn't care about anything but himself and his laughable music career. Her relationship with Grant didn't just fall apart. He blew it up spectacularly when he married another woman without even ending things with Laura first. And then, unbelievably, she lost custody of her 2 young sons to a musician who drank and did drugs almost every day, who had never had a stable job. Little Grant had just turned 2 years old, and Gentle was only 10 months old. It was unthinkable. Except, I guess, to the judge, since Grant had a stable mother figure with him after his quickie marriage to a woman named Amanda. And he had an apartment in his name, so I guess he looked better on paper. But Laura jumped into action quickly. She fought back in court, but only got weekend custody of her boys. But she was far from done fighting. It's amazing how much Laura Ackerson had changed her life in 1 year. She didn't just find a stable job, but began a career, opening her own business, something she could personally be proud of, not just something to satisfy the judge. She was making new friends, too. Her business partner, Siobhan, was a great friend to her, and she had started attending Grace Fellowship Church in Kinston, joining evening Bible study classes. One of the women she met there had agreed to be a character witness for her, and her steadfast best friend Heidi was always there for her. When Laura went missing 1 month before her important custody hearing, Heidi became frantic. She later told a newspaper, "I started bawling. They told me Laura was missing and asked for any information I might have. I knew she wasn't missing." Welcome to episode 214, Erasing Laura Ackerson, Part 2. On Wednesday, July 13th, 2011, Laura had a full day of meeting clients for her ad agency. The last one was a restaurant manager in Wilson. She had been rushing around all day, excited to get this last meeting finished because Grant had emailed her the night before offering another midweek visit. They had met before at a place called Monkey Joe's, where Grant knew the manager, so the kids could play and eat free pizza. The last time had gotten ugly when Grant came to pick up the kids. He had rushed their goodbyes, roughly pulling the boys away and taking them to his car while they were still crying. This scene led to rounds of more emails, where, 3 cheers for Laura, she told Grant he was just using Amanda too, that she was his gravy train. That was too much for Grant. There weren't any more midweek visits for a few weeks. So, on July 12th, Laura was surprised to get the invitation. She even told him in her email back that they should set a start time and pickup time beforehand so there wouldn't be another scene, which pissed Grant off. He defensively wrote that he only rushed their goodbyes because Monkey Joe's was closing. Laura was desperately trying to be reasonable and wanted to see her boys, so it's not like she was trying to anger him. So she apologized, even though she had done nothing wrong except try to avoid another fight or even misunderstanding, if that's how he wanted to see it. But in the end, he seemed to cool off, and Laura accepted the offer. The next day, that Wednesday the 13th, she was busy running from meeting to meeting, but they were all going well. She texted happily with Siobhan and sent Grant a text letting him know she might be running late. While she was still meeting with the restaurant manager in Wilson, Grant texted her at 4:08 p.m. and said, "Would you like to keep the boys for the week until Sunday the 24th?" According to court documents, Laura responded at 4:12 p.m. She wrote, "Okay, I'm leaving Wilson now. I'll call you when I get past the traffic. Where will you be in an hour or so?" Remember, this was in the middle of the week, not on her Friday pickup day, and it was July 13th, so he was now offering her almost 12 days with her boys. Of course, she responded as fast as possible. She was in Wilson, where they were always supposed to meet at the public convenience store Sheetz, but probably because of his offer of a week and a half with the boys, she was willing to go to his apartment in Raleigh and pick them up. I honestly think that's how he got her. She never would have gone there otherwise. At 4:19 p.m., she called an artist named Oksana Samarsky, who she was representing with her new agency. She had already helped sell one of Oksana's paintings, and the two really liked each other and enjoyed working together. Laura was supposed to meet Oksana that evening, but she wasn't sure how long she would be in Raleigh and just wanted to warn her she might not be able to see her at or before 7 p.m. as they had talked about. Oksana missed her call because she was in class, so Laura's voicemail to her was the last time anyone heard from her. Other than Grant and Amanda Hayes, of course. Later that same night, Laura's business partner Siobhan became worried. Laura was supposed to have called Siobhan at 9 p.m. to discuss several business items. But Laura never called. Siobhan knew Laura was supposed to see Oksana, but she did not know she was planning on going to Grant's to pick up the boys. She probably would have been worried much sooner if she had known Laura was going to Grant's apartment. Then 3 days passed, and Siobhan still had not heard from Laura. Aside from their business obligations, she knew Laura was supposed to have picked up her boys from Grant on Friday. It was then that Siobhan was certain something was wrong. Laura never missed an opportunity to see her kids for the weekend. She even called Grant's mom, Patsy, to see if she had heard from Laura. Patsy said she had not. On Monday, July 18th, Siobhan drove to Kinston to look for Laura and maybe talk to the manager of her apartment. She saw that her car wasn't in the garage. Now more worried than ever, she went to the police station in Kinston and reported 27-year-old Laura Jean Ackerson missing. Siobhan was so upset, she also went to Raleigh and even the Wilson police station, the last place she knew for sure Laura had been, to report her missing. The police took Laura's case seriously right away. She had been missing since the 13th, 5 days by then, and she had missed picking up her boys. Siobhan was adamant she would not just not pick up her kids. Investigators first went to Laura's apartment to knock on the door. Then they talked to management and went inside. Though the apartment was tidy, you could tell Laura had been gone for a few days. If by nothing else, she had potted plants that were almost dead from not being watered. Then they watched the surveillance footage. The camera was right outside her door, so they could see what she was wearing: a black sleeveless top and khaki capri pants. She was 5'8" tall and weighed 135 pounds. She had brown hair and hazel eyes. This would be the description given to the media. On the show, See No Evil, the detectives said they could tell from the footage it was just a normal day. She wasn't carrying any extra bags like she was going anywhere other than work. She didn't look distressed. She had her phone in her hand, and she walked out the door at 8:10 a.m. They checked her bank account. The last activity had been July 10th. In 10 days, she had not used her bank card once. And now they had Laura's day planner/diary. and on the 12th, she had noted a problem with Grant. They would later find that in her emails. But they didn't know this the first time they talked to Grant Hayes. Investigators called him, and he confirmed Laura never showed up on Friday, the court-appointed day for custody exchange. He acted concerned, but never mentioned his midweek offer to Laura, of course. Investigators checked out his story and got surveillance footage from Sheetz, the convenience store where Grant always met to exchange the boys, and there he was, on the camera footage, at 4:30 p.m. that Friday the 15th with his two sons. He buys cigarettes and then hangs out with the boys at the patio tables outside, looking like he's waiting. You can see the footage on the episode of See No Evil. For now, Grant Hayes seemed to be truthful, but they were always mindful that the first suspect is the husband or boyfriend, be they ex or not. Oksana Smarsky came in to talk to the investigators and played the voicemail Laura had left her. She was also worried for her friend. They were supposed to have met that Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Laura was letting her know she might be late or even miss their appointment because she was going to get her boys and asked Oksana to call her back. Detective Jerry Falk said that narrowing down the timeline of between around 4:15 from the last text message and calls to around 7 p.m. when she never showed up really helped. Right around that time, he got a call from officers that Laura's car had been found. Her Ford Focus had been abandoned in a Raleigh apartment complex parking lot. This parking lot was less than 400 yards from Grant and Amanda's apartment. They swabbed Laura's Ford for DNA, lifted prints, and collected a hair strand, but nothing they could go on. So now investigators knew from Oksana that Laura was supposed to have gone to get the boys at Grant's that Wednesday, which of course was not the story he had told them, and then her car was found that close to his apartment. They called Grant again and asked him to come in and make a statement. He declined. He said he was moving and couldn't come in at that time, but he had emails with Laura he would be happy to forward, along with a written statement, as soon as he had good cell service. Oh, but he did now remember that Laura had picked up the boys Wednesday around 5 and brought them back around 9:30 p.m., getting in a dig saying she hadn't fed them dinner and his wife had had to take them to Chick-fil-A. And he even vaguely mentioned they discussed a new custody arrangement. But sure, officer, he would send those emails as soon as he could. And hung up. The detective didn't hold his breath for the emails, but obviously Grant didn't send anything or call back or show up to give his statement. And then Heidi Schumacher went to see the Raleigh investigators. And boy, if somebody could connect the dots, it was Heidi. If Siobhan had made them suspicious, Heidi made this clear this may actually be a murder investigation. She gave them the complete history of Laura and Grant, the abuse, his surprise wedding to Amanda, the custody battle, his continuing nastiness and game playing, and his wife Amanda was just as bad. She even came back later with all of her emails with Laura since May on a flash drive for the police. Heidi knew something had happened to her best friend. She knew she was probably dead, not just missing. Heidi also gave them a description of a tattoo on Laura's foot. They were already thinking, grimly, that this might help identify her. Investigators put together from cell phone records that her last known location was Grant and Amanda's Raleigh apartment, and they were finally able to get a search warrant. On Wednesday, July 20th, investigators searched the Hayes apartment. They were not even there. Officers had picked up Amanda's adult daughter, Shay, and she was there to witness the search. The odor of bleach hit them as they walked in the door. For the most part, the apartment was empty, with some stuff still in boxes. Grant and Amanda were moving out, but not everything was gone yet. But the first thing they saw when they walked in was a 3-foot bleach stain in the foyer of the apartment. There was no getting around that. It looked very suspicious. I'll have a photo of this up on my social media. Detective Bobby Latour also said on the show See No Evil that the bathroom was suspiciously clean. The shower curtain was missing and the tub was so clean you could see it shining in places. The bathroom also had a really strong smell of bleach. Something had happened in this bathroom, he intoned. They also found a handwritten note, 2 paragraphs in 2 different handwritings. The beginning of the note read, I, Laura J. Ackerson, agree for the sum of $25,000 not to pursue custody of the 2 minor children. I am not surrendering parental rights, but I do consent to leaving them in the sole custody of their father for now. Further, I agree to drop all pending litigation against their father in the Lenoir County Family Court. The next part of the note appears to be in Laura's handwriting. I'm not sure if at this point investigators already had samples, but it would be obvious later. Well, it would at least be obvious that this was a different person's handwriting. It read, by notifying counsel John Sargent of our arrangement, less the monetary compensation, I understand that I will be able to see my kids when I want at the discretion of their father. It was signed in tight cursive, Laura Ackerson, dated 7/13/11, although it was originally 6/13/11, and the 6 was crossed out for the 7, with Laura's initials by it, as if she was indicating she made the change. John Sargent was Laura's attorney in the custody case. If Grant Hayes thought this note would throw investigators off, he was sorely mistaken. It only made them even more suspicious. First of all, this mother, who jumped at the chance to have 12 days with her sons, then immediately pivoted and signed away custody when she got there to pick them up. From everything they had learned about Laura, including her vicious fight for custody, they did not believe she would have done this for any amount of money. Those who knew Laura also said this out-of-court settlement situation was bullshit. Her friends and brother were adamant that Laura would never have taken such a trade. No amount of money would have made her give up her children. But Laura's signature does appear on that piece of paper. Later, handwriting analysts testified that it was Laura's handwriting. First of all, no one witnessed her supposedly writing this except her ex and his wife. Handwriting analysis has often been criticized as pseudoscience, and there's no way of knowing if Laura was forced to write her part of that note or sign under duress. Handwriting analysis, or graphology, is admissible in court under the 702 rule of evidence, as long as the expert has the right credentials. The problem is, it's ultimately subjective. It's literally someone looking at the writing and comparing it with other known examples. You're just looking at it and making the call. And so, if it is admitted in court, you're usually going to have a battle of the experts. But defense attorneys would actually never dispute this note. I have photos of the note and Laura's signature, which I will post on my social media. Zooming in on that signature, it looks so real, so tight and perfect. It looks practiced, the way a woman signs her name in cursive. Some of us practiced our signatures for years, and we can do it in our sleep. That's what this looks like. Laura's signature on this paper looked like a strong, practiced signature. It was actually the strongest part of that note, in my opinion. But the expert actually refused to say for sure it was Laura's signature, though they were willing to testify the other handwriting looked like Laura's. Of course, I'm obviously not an expert, but it all looks real to me. And the first paragraph, not in her handwriting, looks like a man's handwriting. the expert did testify that it was Grant's. And I seriously doubt that Grant and Amanda had that note already forged and ready. It looks and feels like it was Laura's handwriting and signature. It's that confident, practiced signature. And the other writing is uniform, not a jumble of different letter formations that you might see in a forgery. I know I'm harping on this, much like I harped on how Laura's wedding could have been faked, but it bothers me. The reason to look at this note over and over is not just what the words say, that she took $25,000 for her kids. It's that we don't believe she would do that. And yet, that is her handwriting. It is neat. It doesn't look rushed, and it looks like a well-practiced signature. Why? Why in the world would Laura sign that paper, much less write the additional paragraph? I don't think we'll ever know. Maybe she did it trying to get safely out of Grant's apartment, because after she got there, something had happened. The detectives also noticed that there was a kitchen knife block in the apartment that was missing knives. Maybe someone held a knife on her. Maybe they both did. And she would not want to scream if her babies were in the room. The presence of her children alone would have probably made Laura cooperate. Investigators later said they felt sure that Laura had died where that bleach stain was by the front door. Maybe she almost made it out the door. That breaks my heart, the thought that she was that close to an escape. I think the handwriting puts it over the edge for me. For some reason, I can just see her, scared, just trying to get out of there, calmly signing her name without causing a scene in front of her sons, just trying to leave and get to safety. But she didn't make it. The last few moments of Laura's life will always be a mystery, even though both Grant and Amanda had their stories. However, based on numerous court documents, surveillance footage, and eyewitness accounts, we're at least able to put together a fairly clear sequence of events leading up to her death and what happened afterwards. On Wednesday, July 13th, Laura drove to Raleigh from Wilson to pick up her sons. We know this from the text messages between her and Grant. Now what seemed like a friendly text from Grant was seen for what it really was. He was luring her to his apartment. She never went over there on their visitation exchanges, but telling her she could keep her boys for 12 days was enough to reel Laura in. She answered his text within 4 minutes, telling him she was leaving right then and could be there within an hour. Additionally, Laura's cell phone, which she had used to contact Grant as she made the commute to Raleigh, pinged the appropriate cell towers from Wilson to Raleigh. So we know that Laura got to Grant's apartment. Then later, Grant and Amanda admitted that Laura arrived at their apartment, and according to them, she agreed to sign an out-of-court custody settlement, which investigators found in the apartment just like they had wanted them to. But Grant, being the mastermind criminal he was, had left behind other papers, receipts, and other stuff that looked like a mess on someone's desk. I guess he thought the police would read that note and move on. They found a receipt to an Apple store where apparently Grant had gone on July 14th, the evening after Laura was last seen, and bought a new cord for his MacBook. Put that in your back pocket for now. The detectives also found a song Grant had written, scribbled on a piece of paper. It was entitled Man Killer. According to court documents, Grant's lyrics described the first-person killing of a woman by making her bleed and by strangulation. Here's an excerpt. Give in to me. I want it all. I want your scream and I want you to crawl. I'll make you bleed. Fall to the floor. Don't try to plead. That turns me on. I'm not the one to make you scream. I'm just the one to make you bleed. Don't raise your arms. You can't stop me. I'll put my hands on your throat and squeeze. Disgusting, but it's not like he's the first musician to use that kind of language. And obviously, still nothing concrete for an arrest. Later, in contrast, detectives would watch a video for Amanda. Grant posted a song on YouTube in tribute to his wife and baby daughter soon after she was born. Watching it made me want to scream. And Grant's mother wasn't exactly helping his cause publicly. On July 20th, she told ABC News about her grandsons, quote, "They get over things a lot faster, and they could probably not be affected by things as much as adults are. You know, because they are small and they're very resilient, so they probably figure they're just staying with Dad now." She didn't sound at all worried about the mother of her grandchildren. Sounds to me like she already didn't think Laura was coming back. To be fair, maybe she thought Laura had run off with $25,000. But that's hard to believe considering Grant and his family were having to move in with her because they couldn't afford rent. How would they have paid Laura? Where did Patsy think she really was? I'll be fair. We believe our children. At least we want to. But that's as fair as I'll be about Patsy Hayes. And that July 20th date was an interesting date for that story to run. Her son happened to get back to town after a trip late that night and brought his wife and kids with him to his mom's house. Like I said, detectives by this time had already picked up Shay, Amanda's 22-year-old daughter. She appeared to cooperate and even accompanied them to her mother's apartment while they executed their search warrant. But Shay didn't tell them much at that time. She called her mom in Texas, telling her that the police had picked her up. But Amanda said, don't worry about it, and that she would be home soon. It wasn't until after Grant and Amanda were arrested and Shay went back to the apartment to pick up stuff for the baby and the boys that she changed her mind. She was there to get stuff to take back to Patsy's, but she started rummaging around. She found something she thought was very alarming. An owner's manual for a reciprocating saw, and then she thought of that immaculate main bathroom. The usually messy bathroom everyone used, but especially where the kids bathed and brushed their teeth. Now you could eat dinner off that tub. And by then, there was grisly news coming out of Texas, and Shay realized what she might have found. This time, she didn't stay quiet like a good daughter. She took the reciprocating saw manual to the Raleigh police. Investigators checked around Raleigh to see who may have sold that saw, and there was a Walmart just 3 miles from Grant and Amanda's apartment that sold the saw. They went to this Walmart and watched surveillance footage of Grant Hayes III. At about 2:30 a.m. on Thursday, July 14th, almost 8 hours after Laura had gotten to his apartment, Walmart cameras caught Grant buying several suspicious items: goggles, trash bags, plastic sheeting, a tarp, cleaning supplies, and a reciprocating saw with extra blades. He was easy to spot. It's not like he went in there with a hat pulled down or his hoodie up, avoiding cameras. And this fool repeatedly asked a store manager to help him. At 2:30 a.m., it's not like there are a lot of employees wandering around and someone walked up to him. No. Grant went looking for help. The manager remembered it because he repeatedly came back asking more questions. He couldn't just look for these things himself. He wanted her to tell him where everything was. You can see him even more clearly on the camera above the checkout lane, where he paid cash for his items. Smart enough to use cash, but dumb enough not to think of security cameras and to repeatedly ask an employee for help so he would be remembered. Now detectives felt sick. It seemed pretty clear what Grant and Amanda had done with Laura Ackerson. The police got a warrant for the Hayes bank records, and Grant had gone to Walmart again 2 days later. On Saturday, July 16th, Grant went back to the same damn Walmart at around 7 a.m. and purchased 3 large coolers like you would use for camping. He also bought 6 bags of ice. Detectives again watched the footage, and again, Grant was not in a disguise and he was calm and looked like everything was fine. Then, according to the detectives interviewed on See No Evil, they got a call from Shay with more information. But I think they were compressing for time on that show. Shay told the truth after she found the manual to the saw. But the detectives interviewed said Shay was upset and said that she didn't want to get her mom in trouble, but she had to get it off her chest. She said her mom and Grant had rented a U-Haul trailer and gone to Texas just a few days after Laura went missing. To back up a little for Shay's account. On July 14th, the day after Laura disappeared at around 10:30 a.m., Amanda had called Shay and asked her to come and pick up the kids. She and Grant needed them out of the apartment for a while. I think we know why they needed the children out of there. Shay took the boys to Monkey Joe's, the same play center Laura used to meet Grant at. It's unclear if she took her mom's month-old baby or if the baby stayed in that apartment with Amanda and Grant. I kind of doubt she took the baby while she was wrangling a 2- and 3-year-old at a kid's pizza play palace. But it's sickening to think of that baby in the apartment during what we know they did to Laura in that bathroom. Shay stayed at Monkey Joe's with the kids until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then, as she called her mom to say she was bringing the kids back, Amanda said she needed to borrow her vacuum. Shay brought it over to her mother and Grant's apartment at about 6 o'clock that evening, aggravated by rush hour traffic and that her mom had also asked her to stop and pick up dinner on top of the damn vacuum. This after babysitting for her all day. Despite being pissed off at her mom or Grant, or both, Shay still did whatever her mom asked her to. In Bitter Remains, Diane Fanning wrote that Shay had wanted to go with them on the trip to Texas. She loved her Aunt Karen, whom she had lived with for a while when her mom ran off to the Virgin Islands, and she wanted to visit her aunt too. She said her mother snapped at her, telling her it wasn't a good time. There was no room in the car with all the car seats, or whatever. Amanda also pointed out her mother had just died, guilt-tripping Shay. So, whenever it actually happened, I go with Fanning's version. After Shay brought in the reciprocating saw manual, she told police that her mom and Grant had taken an unexpected trip to Richmond, Texas, 1,200 miles away. At any other time, this trip might seem ordinary. Amanda's older sister Karen did live in Richmond, and again, their mother had recently passed away. But not that recently, and not in light of the fact that Laura, the mother of Grant's 2 sons, was missing. Grant, Amanda, and the kids left on July 16th, 4 days after Laura disappeared, and only 1 day after she was reported missing. It's not like the cops had not already talked to Grant either. Remember, he had an extended phone call with a detective while they thought he was still in North Carolina, but he was actually calling from Texas. Then the family of 5 returned to Raleigh late on July 20th. Again, investigators found the U-Haul location, watched the footage, and talked to the employee who helped Grant, and he remembered him. He said he was going on a fishing trip and had these big coolers for bait he was taking. And in true Grant form, he put it under his name, with Hayes spelled H-A-Z-E. Detectives watched Grant hitch the trailer to his Dodge Durango. That was about 11 a.m. on the same day, the 14th, the day after Laura disappeared. That night, a little after 8 p.m., Grant went to a Target just a mile from his apartment. He bought 2 more coolers on wheels, one 75 quarts, the other 50 quarts. He also bought more cleaning supplies. Then that Saturday night, the 16th, Grant, Amanda, 3-year-old little Grant, 2-year-old Gentle, and the month-old baby girl all got into that Durango, pulling the U-Haul, and left for Texas. It should be obvious by now that Grant, and probably Amanda, though she would later deny it, had dismembered Laura's body. Her remains were stored on ice in those large coolers. The ice chests were loaded into the U-Haul, just like she was fish bait. North Carolina investigators traveled to Texas after they contacted the local Fort Bend County authorities for assistance. The local sheriff's deputies and Raleigh detectives met and together went to Amanda's sister Karen's house in Richmond. When they asked Karen if they could talk to her, she asked them if she could pray first. They said, of course. Then Karen Berry sang like a canary. After confirming that Amanda, Grant, and the kids had visited and then left already, Detective Dexter Gill asked, "Is Laura here?" At this, Karen began sobbing and said, "I'm afraid she is. You need to look across the street." Across the street, less than 100 yards from Karen's home, was Oyster Creek. Detectives sent word back to North Carolina, and Grant and Amanda Hayes were arrested for Laura Ackerson's murder. The operation to find Laura Ackerson's remains was immense. The Gulf Coast Water Authority was contacted to close the dams to reduce the flow of water as crime scene investigators and detectives rowed out on a boat in Oyster Creek. It did not take long for them to spot 2 white objects floating among a patch of lily pads. It was 2 parts of a torso. Divers worked until it was too dark to see anything that night. They began again early the next morning. On Tuesday, July 26th, the Richmond Fire Department and Houston Police Department CSI crews scoured Oyster Creek for more of Laura's remains. They sent investigators, bloodhounds, and divers. And remember, this was Texas in July. It was 100 degrees in the open air and about 90 degrees under the water. For reference, the typical hot tub is give or take 100 degrees. Not to mention that the creek water was full of brown silt. The divers couldn't see anything. They were searching on their hands and knees, in what I should go ahead and mention was known to be alligator-infested waters. In the end, other than the torso, divers found a portion of her leg which was stuck in a patch of vines. And a short distance upstream, they found Laura's decapitated head wrapped in a sheet. Although they could still tell that it was Laura, they had to use dental records to positively identify her. For reasons I will explain in just a bit, Laura's head was more decomposed than the rest of the body parts divers found. Due to the decomposition and water damage, the Texas ME could not determine Laura's exact cause of death. It was declared a homicide by undetermined means. On August 11th, the Gulf Coast Water Authority was cleaning the water gates under bridges. At the gate less than a mile from Karen's house, they found a portion of a leg. This part was carefully sent to North Carolina to be buried with the rest of her remains. The rest of Laura's body was never recovered. 27-year-old Laura Jean Ackerson's partial remains were buried in Tuttle Cemetery in Ionia, Michigan. On July 30th, nearly 100 people gathered at Grace Fellowship Church in Kinston, North Carolina, to remember Laura at a memorial service. Remember, while Laura was building her new life, During her difficult and often lonely custody battle, she had joined this church and made many new friends. One of those friends had plans to testify as a character witness at Laura's next custody hearing. Laura's gravestone epitaph reads, "Now my day is over, night is drawing nigh. Shadows of the evening steal across the sky. When the morning wakes, then may I first rise, pure and fresh and sinless in thy holy eyes." Which is beautiful. Then for some reason on that gravestone I just read you, Amanda's daughter's name is included along with Laura's sons, saying, "I will love you forever," after their names, as though Laura was saying that. There is also a photo of all three children on that stone, across from a photo of Laura. It's not my place to judge, but I sincerely don't understand this at all. I have nothing against an innocent girl who had the misfortune to be born to two murderers, but I don't understand how or why she is on Laura's gravestone. Maybe they just felt sorry for what would surely now be a motherless and fatherless baby. For her sake, I hope she changes her name. For that matter, I hope Laura's sons do too. I would never have given Laura's sons names if they had not already been so widely published everywhere. It also feels important that their names seem more to do with Grant than Laura. Little Grant IV, carrying on the family tradition, and Gentle Rain, a G name with rain spelled like a king's rain, not like the rain showers. That doesn't sound like Laura. It sounds like Grant. I could be wrong, but it's just a feeling I can't shake. It makes more sense that Grant, as we know, felt ownership over his sons, and he put his mark on them in their names. And I was honestly floored to see Amanda's daughter's name on Laura's gravestone. As loving a woman as Laura Ackerson was, I don't believe she would have considered Amanda's daughter like her own. It's just so crazy to me. Grant and Amanda were already in jail by the time of Laura's memorial, so it's not like her family didn't know. But grieving families do things for all sorts of reasons, and it's not really my business, of course. Maybe they simply did feel sorry for that baby girl. I just couldn't help but point it out. It's not like the gravestone isn't easily found online. Anyway, let's move back to the timeline, or actually back up a little. Back still on July 22nd, Raleigh investigators, which at that point was a task force, even before Laura's remains were found in Texas, went to Kinston, North Carolina, looking for Grant and Amanda Hayes. They went to the home of Grant Jr. and Patsy Hayes, and then sat there watching the house, waiting for that Durango to pull in the driveway. They were waiting for search warrants for the Durango and Grant and Amanda's cell phones. As soon as they got them, they knocked on the door and Grant answered. The cops took both Grant and Amanda to the station, but they returned back to his parents' home by midnight. The police later said Grant behaved nonchalantly the whole time, like he had nothing to hide. His email and Facebook messages would tell another story. At this point, Grant still had his MacBook. This dummy was talking to every friend he could think of, asking them to pray for him, Amanda, and for Laura's safe return, because the police had trashed his home, which I guess was his official reason to these friends that he was back at his parents' now. And also, poor thing, the cops had taken his car and both of their cell phones. If Laura didn't turn up soon, it would look bad for him. He reminded many friends that he was a black man who was fighting a white girl for custody, and now that white girl was missing. He was even asking people if they remembered Laura ever mentioning anything about just up and leaving, anything about her past that might help explain why she had just left on her own. Grant had reason to be worried. Investigators found blood in the Durango when they sprayed luminol, and not just on Grant's driver's side, but on the passenger side seatbelt and door. And wedged between the seats was Dr. Calloway's voluminous psychological report on Grant and Laura. There were many notes in the margin from Grant. No, never, things like that. So he drove to Texas with that report in the car with him. And how did they come to this macabre task, driving Laura's remains to Texas? There would be conflicting stories, naturally, though at first the Hayes were a united front. Later, according to Grant, he left the room where Laura was signing the settlement note, leaving her alone with Amanda. When Grant returned, he claimed that Laura and Amanda were at the tail end of a physical altercation. Amanda was unharmed, but Laura was on the floor. Grant told investigators Laura died as a result of the injuries from her and Amanda's fight. In fact, he said it happened in front of her 2-year-old son. But according to Amanda, that's not at all what happened. In Amanda's version, all 3 adults engaged in a heated argument over custody. Obviously, Laura was upset because she wanted the kids, and Grant was also upset. But Amanda was concerned about where this $25,000 lump sum Grant was offering Laura was supposed to come from. So far, Grant had already sold a large amount of Amanda's prized possessions. She was upset, trying to figure out where the hell he would get this money. Amanda also told a tale that Laura became enraged when Amanda wouldn't let her hold the new baby. So Laura began following Amanda around the apartment, and then the 2 women bumped into each other due to how close Laura was following her, or maybe shoving her, was how Amanda made it seem. Then she claimed Laura tripped on the carpet. Then Amanda said Grant, quote, stepped in after Laura fell. She said that Laura was injured, so Grant took her into the bathroom, presumably to stop bleeding, I guess, and he sent Amanda and the children away. Grant didn't want the 2 boys to see their mother like that. This was part of that Chick-fil-A story he had already been telling. And Amanda did leave the apartment late that night, sometime before 10 p.m. Remember, the best lies have a little bit of truth in them. So Amanda took the kids on a drive while Grant was supposed to call 911 and get EMS there. But when Amanda returned, Grant told her that Laura was fine. She had gotten up and left on her own. No paramedics needed. None of this makes any sense. We're supposed to believe that Laura was going to take a payout in exchange for her 2 sons, whom she loved more than life itself, and that Laura was so infuriated about not being allowed to hold her ex's new wife's baby that she started following her around, even shoving her. Bullshit. If anything, the Laura Ackerson everyone knew, the Laura Ackerson who was so polite and kind in all of her texts and emails with Amanda, would have politely told Amanda her baby was beautiful, but she would not be demanding to hold that baby. She was there to pick up her sons, not coo over her ex's new baby. It's so ridiculous. At the end of the day, Grant and Amanda can't both be right. One or both of them was definitely in that room when Laura died. Someone is lying, probably both of them to certain degrees. And we will probably never know what really happened. Regardless of the exact details of the situation, Laura was murdered. We don't know who dealt the final blow, or who held the cord that strangled her, or if they did it together. But that didn't matter on the evening of Wednesday, July 13th, 2011. All that mattered at this point was that Grant and Amanda had a body to deal with. And how they chose to deal with Laura's body was, in no uncertain terms, absolutely depraved. When they were finished, they got on the road to Texas. Then, after 19 hours of driving, on the evening of Sunday, July 17th, Grant, Amanda, and the kids arrived with that U-Haul trailer at her sister's home in Richmond. Later, during her own court testimony, Amanda would claim that she had no clue that Laura's remains were in the U-Haul. Amanda claimed she had no part in dismembering Laura. She claimed that she never even saw the body. She supposedly thought she and Grant were dropping off some of her mother's things at Karen's house. That's it. And she and Grant had stopped at a self-storage unit in Raleigh before going to Texas to pick up a piece of furniture. But if Amanda's story were to hold up, what was she doing in the apartment during the hours when Grant was dismembering Laura's body? She wasn't at Monkey Joe's with Shay, her baby, and her 2 stepsons, and there's no indication that Amanda had any other alibi for this time period. Maybe she had her headphones on with music turned up really loud. Or maybe Grant dismembered Laura at a different location. It is strange that not a single trace of blood was ever found in Grant and Amanda's apartment, and investigators tore that place up. They removed the plumbing and ripped up the carpet. But nah, that clean, shiny bathroom, along with all the tarps, plastic, and other accessories, all point to the bathroom. My grisly guess is that they put a tarp in the tub before dismembering Laura. They didn't just wash all the blood down the drain, because typically when investigators remove all the plumbing like that, they do usually find blood. It's why they've learned to rip out all the plumbing, no matter what, which at that time meant tearing apart the roof in the apartment below Grant and Amanda's. But here's the thing. Once someone is dead and their heart stops pumping, they don't bleed out. I'm not saying there wouldn't have been blood, even a mess. But I would say the bleach stain by the front door is where Laura did the most bleeding. By the time she was in that bathtub, her heart had long stopped. Grant didn't even have the saw until almost 9 hours later. So if they used a tarp, there wouldn't have been that much blood to wash down the drain, if any. And of course, they would have poured bleach down the drain too, just in case. And here's another way I'll never understand how smart and how stupid of a criminal Grant was. Somehow, no trace of blood was found, but we have his dumbass on surveillance footage at Walmart twice, Target once, U-Haul, and the Home Depot in Texas. Maybe it was Amanda who was smart about the cleanup. But hey, maybe it was Amanda who was the smart one, period, who sent Grant out for those supplies. But maybe she forgot to warn him about cameras and talking to people. I just don't know. We never will. Ultimately, they did not testify against each other. On that Wednesday, July 20th, investigators had tried to comb through garbage looking for any signs. But the most recent dumpster pickup had been on the 15th, 2 days after Laura went missing. Employees with city trash had assured them that they would have seen a body, or even blood, and if they had not seen it, they would have known the smell. And remember, Amanda had gotten the kids out of the house on the 14th. Maybe they would have noticed a body. Who is to say about the blood, especially if the dumpsters were emptied that soon after her murder? Detectives found out that about 45 trucks had dumped at the same trash center, so whatever was in that particular dumpster was under more than 10 feet of trash by the time they were questioning the city about it. I've seen on documentaries where police will go to dumps and search for bodies. I'm not sure why they wouldn't have here, Except all of this was happening very fast, and Amanda and Grant Hayes had just rolled back into town on the night of the 20th. Maybe they thought they would get a confession and find out where Laura was then. They would, but not from Grant or Amanda. It was from Karen Barry, and she was the reason why Laura's family and friends had a body to lay to rest. 5 days after the investigators were looking in Kinston dumpsters, Laura's remains were being found 1,200 miles away in a creek in Richmond, Texas. The investigators did actually go through the trash and found many things that helped, including latex gloves with Laura's DNA on them. But while they were in Texas, it was all on Amanda to get her sister's help. Karen Barry would testify at both trials. Grant put it on Amanda to explain things to Karen. Karen testified that her sister said, "I hurt Laura. I hurt her bad." And then she said, "Laura is dead." She then called Grant over to join the conversation. Karen did point out that she later asked Amanda if she was covering for Grant, and her sister just nodded. After that was when she had a conversation about the creek across from her house. They asked to borrow Karen's boat. She claimed she didn't know for sure what they were doing, but she guessed. But on their first morning in Texas, Grant had a conversation with Karen's son Dalton. "How deep is that creek?" "Up to 13 feet in some places," was the answer. "Are there alligators in the creek?" "Yes," was the answer. Later, Amanda questioned Karen's other son, Shelton. "Do alligators eat people?" she asked. "Yeah, they're alligators," was his answer. Then she asked about hogs. Shelton managed a business that caught feral hogs. "What about hogs? Do they eat people?" Shelton said yes. "I have a search on my computer now about this question, and evidently they will eat people, but they won't eat bones, teeth, or even fingernails. I hate that I know this." And so I suppose this is where the conversation turned to other ideas. Karen later characterized this as brainstorming. They discussed disposing of Laura's remains by feeding them to wild hogs. They searched for a hole on the property big enough to bury Laura, but that idea failed too. Then they considered storing Laura in Karen's septic tank. That way, they could just wait for Laura to fully disintegrate. But the opening to the septic tank was inaccessible. Whatever the outcome of this brainstorming, later that morning, July 19th, Amanda went to an ATM and got cash, and then Grant went to a local Home Depot. And again, didn't know exactly what he was looking for, so he asked for help with covering up an odor. He said he wanted some kind of acid, and even though the employee said that wouldn't work on an odor, he sold Grant a couple of boxes of muriatic acid, what would later be 8 bottles. He also purchased gloves on the advice of the employee and a 32-gallon trash can. The acid did not work, but it explained the difference in decomposition from Laura's head and the rest of the pieces they had found. It was most important to try and dissolve her head because of the identifying features, like her teeth. An expert would later say they definitely tried because acid marks were found on Laura's teeth. There would be another expert who would analyze the soil in the hog pen where Shelton worked and found muriatic acid in that soil. I don't need to connect the dots here, and I don't want to. What is important is after this, the plan was to take Karen's boat out on Oyster Creek that night. Amanda later testified that she would, quote, never forget how Grant revealed to her that Laura's remains were in the U-Haul. She said that while they were at her sister's house in Texas, quote, he was smoking a cigarette and he was really calm and he told me, "What would you do if I told you Laura was dead?" He told me he got scared, that he was a black man with a dead white woman, and no one was going to believe him. When she testified, Amanda said that Grant was holding a machete when he said these things, which scared her. She said she was afraid of not cooperating with his plans. However, Amanda also testified that Grant had never physically harmed her before. Security tapes showed Amanda pouring out those same bottles of muriatic acid near Karen's home. And the discarded bottles were also recovered. Incidentally, when Amanda was finally arrested, she had on the same clothes in her mugshot that she had on in the video of her dumping out the acid. That will be important later. On the evening of Tuesday, July 19th, Grant and Amanda borrowed Karen's boat and traveled along Oyster Creek. Over the course of several hours, they dropped the portions of Laura's body into the creek. Well, Amanda claimed that Grant did this while she had her back turned the whole time. She helped row the boat, but never saw or touched any part of Laura's body. She said her husband did that. She just heard the water splashes as he dumped them in the creek. After all of this, they rushed to return the U-Haul at a location in Richmond, then jumped on the road 19 hours back, somehow making it back to Patsy Hayes' home either late on the 20th or in the early morning hours of the 21st. Then on the morning of Monday, July 25th, 2011, 32-year-old Grant Hayes and 39-year-old Amanda Hayes were arrested for Laura's murder. They were held at the Wake County Detention Center without bail. Investigators had not yet matched DNA taken from Laura's hairbrush, as well as her son's, to the remains they had found. When they did, a grand jury returned an indictment on August 5th. No charges were pressed against Amanda's sister, Karen Berry, but that's only because she agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. She had already known she would have to face her sister in court. Now it was official. Craig Brady, the chief deputy for the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office, was baffled by this crime. He told the News and Observer that it seemed strange that someone would kill their victim, dismember them, and then drive more than 1,000 miles to dispose of the body within 100 yards of a known relative, after passing through a lot of secluded areas on their way to Texas that were better suited for a body. Brady said, so they drove through 5 or 6 states and over a 40-mile wide swamp in Louisiana, all so they could bring the body here? Fortunately for police, criminals just aren't very smart. The evidence against Grant and Amanda was insurmountable. Investigators had found respirator mask packaging and latex gloves. The DNA on the gloves matched Laura. Grant had also been caught lying to the police. When they first called him about Laura's missing person status, Grant had said he was in Raleigh when he was actually in Richmond, Texas. As it turns out, Grant had lied to law enforcement multiple times. He had given inconsistent stories regarding his whereabouts on July 13th several times. In the fall of 2011, law enforcement seized Grant's email records. That's how they learned that Grant had reached out to Laura to invite her to another midweek visit with her boys. It was just supposed to be another visit to Monkey Joe's. He had not yet offered to let her keep the boys until the 24th. They also saw a few emails he had sent on July 15th to Laura, again offering the extended time with her boys, and then complaining that she didn't show up that Friday, which doesn't make sense between the two. Anyway, he did this 2 days after she was already dead. Originally, Grant and Amanda were to be tried together as co-defendants. However, Amanda's attorney accused Grant of sending Amanda intimidating letters from the Wake County Jail. She alleged that Grant threatened to kill Amanda in these letters. So in April of 2013, Wake County Judge Donald Stevens ruled that Grant and Amanda would be tried separately. On Monday, September 2nd, 2013, jury selection began for the trial of 34-year-old Grant Hayes. The prosecution's case was simple. They argued that Grant and Amanda wanted Laura out of the way so they could have custody of the two boys. With the next custody-related court date looming on the horizon in August of 2011, they knew they had to act fast. As I told you in part 1, they knew they were about to lose custody of Grant's sons. So Grant and Amanda lured Laura to their apartment. They promised her that she would see her kids for an unexpected midweek visit that would last to the 24th, almost 12 full days. And after she got to their apartment, they were going to offer Laura $25,000 in exchange for full custody. Or they were really going to force Laura to sign a piece of paper saying that. I believe it's doubtful that they had any intention of letting Laura walk out of there, regardless of what she signed. The state supported their theory with 47 witnesses and 500 pieces of evidence. Through the testimony of Laura's friends and family, they proved that Grant was abusive to her. And the prosecuting attorneys called to the stand the psychologist, Dr. Ginger Calloway, who had evaluated both Laura and Grant for custody purposes. Dr. Calloway testified that Grant had a history of illicit drug use, suffered from a possible mental illness, he was manipulative and a liar, he had a DWI, and he had literally told her that he wanted to obliterate Laura Ackerson. Remember, Dr. Calloway's report was in the Durango, wedged where Grant would have sat to drive. That report was a trigger. He was about to lose, and Grant Hayes didn't lose. Grant Hayes had to win. Shelton, Karen's son, testified that he heard Grant say to someone on the phone, "I don't need an alibi. I was with my family." Wonder who he was talking to. My money is on Patsy Hayes. The state said the importance of that note with Laura's handwriting is that it showed they, or at least Grant, had intent to kill Laura, and that he had acted in a cool state of mind. Heidi Schumacher's testimony, as you can imagine, was not emotional. She had a spine of steel and a great memory. She despised Grant Hayes, and no matter how sad she was for Laura, her calm and collected demeanor on the stand was a credit to her. It wasn't just an emotional friend who was guessing. She knew dates, times, the whole story. She testified, approximately 2 months before her death, she told me she was very worried. And she said, "Heidi, if anything happens to me, if I commit suicide, or if I go missing, or if I get into a car accident, Grant did it." The state also put on Grant's jailhouse companion, a man named Pablo Trinidad. I know. Jailhouse informants are not always the best. But as the state will later prove, Pablo had no way of reading any articles about what happened before he testified, because it wasn't coming out in the papers or online until after he testified. And he humbly said there were no promises made to him about his sentence. He just hoped it would look good for the parole board. Pablo was serving 21 years for conspiracy to traffic in cocaine and possession of a firearm. So he was a convicted felon, but not a murderer. Remember Pablo's 21-year sentence, by the way. He and Grant were in the same housing area of the jail for around 1 to 2 weeks. Pablo testified that one day, the inmates were watching Grant's case being covered on TV. Seeing what Grant was accused of, the other inmates were outraged. They wanted to jump Grant. But Pablo diffused the situation. After this incident, Grant admitted to Pablo that he called Laura and convinced her to come to his apartment under false pretenses of settling the custody dispute. Pablo testified that Grant told him she was an unfit mother and that they'd been having a custody battle for some years now, going back and forth, and he was just tired of it. So he said that he placed a call to her and lured her to his apartment, and that's when him and his wife subdued her and strangled her. And the famous Dr. Deborah Radish from the Michael Peterson case testified that Laura's neck sustained wounds consistent with stabbing or strangulation. There was no way to be sure which, but she was sure the wound was not from the dismemberment. Laura had suffered the injury to her fourth cervical vertebra, as well as damage to certain tissue and thyroid cartilage. So it's very possible she was strangled. Remember that Apple power cord you have in your back pocket? Dr. Radish agreed that was a possibility. She also said it was very possible it was a knife wound. Remember, there were missing knives from the kitchen block. If I had to guess, they tried to use the apple cord first and she struggled too much, so someone lost their temper and used the knife. Or maybe strangling was taking too long. It's not how it looks in the movies. Or maybe Laura fought like hell for her life. She knew she had to and was making too much noise, so they used the knife. Whatever happened, it's very clear that a great deal of blood was spilled near that front door. Like I said, as Laura was almost making her escape. I've mentioned Diane Fanning's book, Bitter Remains, several times. It is an amazing read, and if for no other reason than to get her idea of those last moments. I may not actually believe that is how it happened, but I like how she wanted to think it did. Grant's defense team took one definitive stance. Yes, Grant had helped get rid of Laura's body, but he hadn't killed Laura. His wife, Amanda, was entirely responsible for that. They repeated the story I told you earlier. How Grant left the room for a short period of time. Then when he returned, Laura was, somehow, dead by Amanda's hands. The defense was vague on how she died, but they claimed that it was an accidental death, not an orchestrated murder scheme. Amanda and Laura had simply gotten into a fight that went wrong. The defense's first witness was Amanda's sister, Karen. Karen testified about how Amanda came in and told her that she had, quote, hurt Laura and hurt her bad. Grant's attorneys leaned heavily on this statement, and Grant's defense attorney said in opening statements, the evidence will show that the death of the victim happened in a spontaneous, unpredictable way at the hands of Amanda Hayes. The defendant helped clean up the evidence and dispose of the body. That's a serious thing. That's a terrible thing, but it's not murder. No, he just dismembered the mother of his children with a reciprocating saw, drove her remains across country, and tried to feed her to alligators. And we're supposed to believe he did all of that even though he didn't kill Laura. As Becky Holt, a prosecutor, would say in closing arguments, he robbed her of her life and he robbed her of her dignity. In closing arguments, the state played a song Grant wrote and performed about Laura when he first went to New York. It was called Broomstick Rider. The words were, "My baby's mama, don't talk to me. Don't want your drama. I got 2 kids by you. I can't take any more from you. I put a price tag on your head. You must have told your attorney I got intentions of killing you." And the worst part, Grant bounced in his seat as the prosecution played this song for the court. He literally sat there dancing in his seat, mouthing the words. The state, after calling 47 witnesses and introducing more than 500 pieces of evidence over the last 2 weeks, was finally finished. The jury of 4 men and 8 women listened and then watched as Grant Hayes jammed along in his seat to his song, Broomstick Rider. That was probably more effective than anything they said in closing. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks, and on Monday, September 16th, 2013, after 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Grant Hayes III guilty of first-degree murder. He was automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the advice of his counsel, Grant had not testified at his own trial. Later, he would say that he wished he had testified. He felt he was misled by his lawyers. Grant firmly believed that, from the very beginning, his trial was rigged. Yeah, right. The presiding judge, Donald Stevens, said it best, quote, "I think that a jury verdict in a case like this in an hour and a half probably speaks louder than anything anyone could say about this case." Right away, Grant's attorneys announced their intentions to appeal. He didn't testify on his own behalf, but he was happy to give a jailhouse interview and continue to throw Amanda under the bus. Speaking with ABC 11, Grant Hayes claimed he didn't kill Laura. He said Amanda killed her in an act of self-defense, quote, "As Amanda was walking away, Laura snatched her back by her hair after telling her she was going to take her child from her, and Amanda told me that she forcefully hit her in the throat with her elbow." Grant said when he came back into the room, Laura was lying on the floor bleeding from her nose and Amanda was screaming. "It does not dawn on me in any way that she might be mortally wounded at all. I mean, I was gone out of the room less than a minute, literally. And, Laura died in front of me and my son, little Grant." Of course, he couldn't deny what he did with that saw in his bathroom. But it's like he feels sorry for himself. "It's awful," he said. "It's something you never want to experience or know what it's like. It's haunting." This mother trucker said it was haunting for him. He went on to say, "I need to extend my condolences to Laura's family and friends and to my family as well. But I didn't kill Laura. And as bad of a crime as desecrating a corpse is, it's a worse crime to sentence a man to life without giving him a fair trial." Hey, buddy, your attorney can't stop you from testifying. They can't help it if you're stupid, and they were smart to advise you to stay off the stand. You were your own worst enemy. In 2015, Grant did appeal, but nothing came of it. Today, 44-year-old Grant Hayes is in the Eastern Correctional Institution in Maury, North Carolina. He will never be released. By the time Amanda's trial came around, this was a highly publicized case. Camera crews from Inside Edition and other national media outlets were staking out seats in the courtroom. Nancy Grace, NBC's Dateline, and numerous other court TV shows were also following the case. In January of 2014, 3 years after Laura was murdered, 41-year-old Amanda Hayes' jury trial finally began. The prosecution presented basically the same case they had against Grant. He and Amanda were both equally responsible for Laura's murder. It was on purpose, and it was to avoid a bitter custody battle. Amanda's defense counsel also took a similar approach to Grant's attorneys during his trial. They argued that Grant had killed Laura, not Amanda. After she fell or hurt herself, Grant told Amanda to take the kids and leave, and he took Laura into the bathroom. Amanda had only helped with the body disposal when she realized that Laura's remains were in the U-Haul they had towed to Texas. Amanda's lawyers painted Grant as an intimidating figure who had pressured Amanda into her role in the crime. So we are supposed to believe that Amanda didn't know Laura was in the main bathroom of that apartment, the bathroom the kids used, for 4 days. She got to their apartment on the 13th. They left for Texas on the night of the 16th. 4 days it took them to dismember Laura and sneak her out in coolers to the U-Haul. But Amanda had no idea. Sure. The defense said Grant was a sociopath and had the nerve to call Laura and Amanda both victims. Amanda's team described Grant as seeming very charming, witty, and very talented, while actually being controlling, manipulative, and deceitful, which was true. But those last 3 words were perfect for Amanda Hayes, too. Amanda did testify on her own behalf. I bet there was no talking her out of it. Little Miss Actress thought she had this. During her testimony, Amanda said she wanted to leave Grant as soon as she found out that he had murdered Laura. But she couldn't because she thought he would hurt her newborn daughter or her older daughter, Shay. I watched her testimony on YouTube. She sits there in her pink dress and her little girl voice saying, "No, ma'am, over and over when prosecutor Becky Holt asks her repeatedly about seeing Laura's body, about helping dump Laura's body. We are to believe she turned her back while on that boat in Oyster Creek and didn't help her husband. Bullshit. Her wide-eyed little girl routine was sickening. The prosecution called Amanda a liar. One attorney said her statements were so ridiculous compared to the physical evidence that she made 0 sense. They also pointed to her background as an actress. Prosecutor Bob Zellinger said she has given the performance of her life. The state also pointed out the testimony of Amanda's cellmate. That cellmate said Amanda told them Laura died during a kitchen accident in Amanda's apartment, which really goes against the whole "I wasn't even in the apartment at the time" story that Amanda's defense counsel was peddling. A kitchen accident is also interesting with the knife theory and the huge bleach stain by the front door. Laura bled there. So like Pablo before in Grant's trial, Laura's cellmate's story rang true. She also testified that she was not promised anything for her testimony, and the defense could not prove otherwise. Plus, the prosecution pointed out that Amanda had continued to correspond with Grant even after they were incarcerated. She would write letters to Grant's mother, who would then relay them to Grant. Patsy Hayes wasted no time bringing them to the prosecutor to make her daughter-in-law look bad. In the letters, Amanda told Grant how much she loved him and thought about him every day. While the nuances of a domestically violent relationship could allow this to happen, it does make you wonder, how can she still love a man who blamed it all on her to save himself? And let's not forget, she also testified that he had never harmed her. Dr. Calloway testified that the Hayeses wanted full custody of the 2- and 3-year-old boys and that their wishes, comments, and actions suggested that they would, quote, effectively erase Laura as the children's mother. There was a collective insensitivity to the children's needs for their mother. Although Grant declined to testify for Amanda, how could he, since he blamed her and he couldn't risk being cross-examined for his own appeal? But he did give that jailhouse interview and supported his wife. Quote, "My wife is not guilty of murder in any sense of the word. What she did was a reflex, and the injuries sustained as a result of her defending herself and her child led to her death." Grant Hayes then actually said, "Laura got herself killed." The trial had more than 10 days of testimony and over 50 witnesses. On Wednesday, February 19, 2014, after 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury convicted 41-year-old Amanda Hayes of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 13 to 16 years in prison. Pablo Trinidad got 21 years for cocaine and firearm possession. Let that sink in. This was obviously a disappointment to many, as the jury could have sentenced her to first-degree murder. Then Amanda would have been automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole, just like Grant. Laura's father, Roger, who sat through every day of the trial, said of Amanda, "She's a manipulator. She's a liar. She uses that sing-songy voice when she wants to get something from you. That doesn't work with me." I don't think it was the pink dress, or Amanda's testimony, or her voice. I do just think the jury believed Grant was the murderer and Amanda was his accomplice. That's what most people believe. But since Amanda had not received as harsh of a sentence as Grant, North Carolina prosecutors called Texas prosecutors and gave them the heads up. Prosecute Amanda Hayes in Texas for the disposal of Laura's body. She had now admitted to being there in open court. She knew Laura was dead. She knew she was at the very least helping Grant. In 2018, 46-year-old Amanda was tried for tampering with evidence, in this case a corpse, in Texas. They had that deer hunter's video of her dumping the acid, and she was wearing the exact same clothes in her booking photo in North Carolina. Amanda was convicted and given the maximum. She was sentenced to an additional 20 years in prison, which was the maximum amount she could have received. Amanda's sentences will be served consecutively. So once she finishes her time in the Anson Correctional Institute in Polkton, North Carolina, they'll cart her ass straight to Texas. If Amanda ever gets out of prison, she'll be in her 70s. Today, she is 51 years old. I saw on one documentary a Texas prosecutor say that it wasn't unusual to hear from other prosecutors within their state, but the call from North Carolina was a first, and they were happy to oblige. Amanda and Grant have since divorced, and as far as my research could find, Amanda has never appealed, which might seem odd. But author Diane Fanning explained it pretty well in an interview with WRAL News promoting her book, Bitter Remains. She's not a stupid woman, Fanning said about Amanda, going on. She knows that if she went for a new trial, there's a strong possibility that, this time, the jury wouldn't be convinced that she was partially a victim. It appears that Grant and Laura's two sons are being raised by Grant's mother, Patsy. In early August of 2011, Laura's father filed for custody of the young boys. However, 3 years later, in February 2014, Grant's mother, Patsy, was still their primary guardian. Roger Ackerson later died in 2021 at the age of 75. He is buried near his daughter. As far as we can tell, Brenda, Laura's mother, evidently still lives in Michigan, and her married name is now Brooks. I have found no indication that she came to the trial or was in any way interested in what happened to her daughter. Incidentally, Patsy Hayes lost her daycare as a result of the bad publicity. 2/3 of her children dropped out, until there wasn't much use in continuing on. I don't feel at all sorry for her, except that as guardian of Laura's children, I would have wanted her to be financially stable, of course. So it's hard for me to sneer at Patsy losing her business, even if she did deserve to. Laura Ackerson's sons are now 15 and 14 years old, soon to be 16 and 15. I cannot even imagine how their lives have been. I doubt they would even remember the warm, loving mother who fought so desperately to get custody of them back from her abusive ex, their father. Laura's phone and her tape recorder, along with her purse, were never found. While the state could subpoena her text and email records, whatever was recorded on that phone and that tape recorder was lost forever. There's no doubt in my mind the recordings would have buried Grant in the custody case. Their poor mother, who had always been too smart to be alone with Grant Hayes again, until he offered her something he knew she couldn't resist: 12 solid straight days with her boys. After a year of weekends only, that lure was just too strong. As one of the state's prosecutors said, he couldn't control her in life, so now he has to control her in death. As the other prosecutor said, he wanted to erase Laura from his life. He wanted to have a family without Laura in it. This has been one of the most horrific cases I've ever covered. But like almost every domestic violence case that ends in murder, it was about control. Grant Hayes had lost control of Laura Ackerson, so he could not let her live. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelly. I'm sorry the creek did rise with almost 13,000 words more, and I couldn't bear to split this into 3 parts, even though there were 2 trials. Today's episode was written by me, Erica Kelly, and was researched by me and Andrea Marshbank. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley Horner. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Brendan Schexnayder of Southern Gothic and Erica Kelly. As I said, an excellent read for this case is Diane Fanning's Bitter Remains, a custody battle, a gruesome crime, and the mother who paid the ultimate price. It was a very helpful source, and of course covers way more ground than I could ever in 2 episodes. If you have any case suggestions, please go to my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com, and click on the listener suggestion tab, or email sftcresearch@gmail.com. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messages, but please remember to come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds. But it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit-asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, and please tell a friend or rate and review. I'm also on all large platforms like iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, and YouTube. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.